Hey everybody, it's Bethany. Welcome to the Beauty of Pastel here on YouTube. I'm so excited to bring you another soft pastel landscape painting lesson. Make sure you click like and subscribe, and also don't forget to hit that little notification bell so you can get notified whenever I post a new lesson. I hope you enjoy watching this come together. Let's get started. Okay everybody, you can see my little mini painting up there on the left, and I have my paper taped off at, it's not quite a 12 by 9, it's more of a 12 by 10. It's a little more square than a traditional 9 by 12. And you can see that I didn't even put in my normal pencil sketch just outline of my shapes. I'm just diving right in, moving quickly using a dark blue new pastel, following the lines and looking at the general shapes of the trees and the bushes, the little pathway and where the light is in the mini. So I'm not working off of the photograph anymore like I worked on for the mini. I'm only working off of this reference. I am working towards an alcohol or surgical spirits wash right here, and my paper that I'm using, UArt 500 grit, can handle alcohol really well. If you are unable to procure UArt or you don't have any, you can always just test your piece of paper to make sure that it will accept alcohol or surgical spirits, or you can use water. Also test that just to make sure it won't buckle your paper. You can also use mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits, or you can just use a piece of pipe foam and push and kind of rub gently across that pigment to push it into the paper. The whole point of an underpainting is to tone your support to create the proper value map in the beginning. These are my shadow colors that I'm putting in right now. These are the darkest pieces of the trees and the land and the pathway. And then after this is basically painted on to my paper, I can start applying the dry layers that are lighter in value and a little bit brighter in color. I started to put in the alcohol, and then I decided to go back and just gently swipe in a little bit of very, terracotta, almost ochre colored pastel, because I love sometimes how those areas can mingle together whenever they drip down with this alcohol wash. And those areas that I put that warmer color in, those are the areas that are going to be warmer or receiving a little bit more light. And so you can kind of compare how in that top left little mini painting and the one that I'm working on now, how the area in that top mini painting where there's light, that's where the areas are that I'm going to be using a warmer color. Light is warmth. And so whenever you're using your underpainting, really think about that. Where do you want there to be a brighter area, or just a sunlit area? In those areas, you can use those warmer colors. I like to use oranges, ochre. I like to use magentas and fuchsias also. Those are wonderful colors for light-filled areas that really help support that feeling of light just as it delicately is dancing on the landscape. I'm moving quickly here. I'm using my number 6 size fan brush. I love it. I push and pull with it. And right now it's looking very dark. Of course it's wet, and so it will dry just a little bit lighter. But I'll be able to really lighten this piece just with the subsequent layers of my dry soft pastels. Using also just a little glazing brush just to move that pastel around on the paper just a little bit more. I'm also taking my brush, it's hard to see in the video, but I'm liberally putting on some alcohol and letting it drip down, because when it drips down the paper, it really creates these lovely blooms that are just really nice, especially in grassy areas. I can also flick the pastel or flick the brush with the alcohol on it to create little spots that also drip. It's just getting texture in your piece. Since we have pastels and we aren't able to do any type of impasto painting, we have to use the methods that we can to, basically simulate texture. Here you saw that I just swiped in some pink for my sky. Of course, I love to do that, especially if I'm planning on putting in a blue sky. It just really helps create some beautiful vibrancy and just kind of a little bit of color vibration in your sky. And instead of doing an alcohol wash, I'm just pushing it in with my pipe foam, even into the distant trees. That ensures that the sky, there won't be any type of halo around your trees, that your sky, is behind the trees. And I don't normally put in my sky with alcohol wash, especially a sky type like this. If I'm doing more clouds and a sunset image, I will probably do an alcohol wash. But this, I'm just really wanting to tone the paper in a solid form. And so to tone the paper solidly, and also just to be a little bit quicker and not have to wait for the alcohol to dry up in the sky, I just push it in with that pipe foam. Now you can see that I'm just immediately jumping in to warming up those trees, starting to, just looking at my reference painting, and just the general slope of that land that's over on the right, and then also the taller trees that are over on the left. And whenever I paint trees, a lot of it is about, your touch, your just delicate way of kissing the paper with your pastel, and looking at, trying, you want to save as much tooth as possible. We're starting to bring in those, more classic tree colors. This is going to be a very green painting. And with that blue as an underpainting, it creates almost an instant deep shadow area of the tree. I want there to be light that is, glazing down and across from the top upper right. And so, maybe there's a little field, or there's some trees off in the distance that are, really being hit by that bright light. And so I'm, of course, working on a much brighter, more vibrant, very yellow, which is very warm, very yellow green right there. I'm also going to start putting in my sky. I'm working really quick. This is not sped up. This is real time, and it's just, fast decisions. I'm trying to kind of retain that feeling of working on those minis. It was so refreshing to just be working quickly without having to agonize over thinking so much about our work, which is sometimes a rut that I get into. I overthink all the time. And so working quickly helps me be very spontaneous with my mark making. It helps me, it's less tedious. And as a busy mom of 3 kids still here at home, that's one reason why I love pastels, is it allows me to paint quickly, feel accomplished in my studio, and then go and move, go about my day with my family and other activities that I am doing. Now you'll notice that I'm working on my sky, working lighter and then to darker colors of blues, the darker values. And I don't want the painting necessarily to have a striped feeling. And so I love to, put in these colors and then blend back down into them. So you can see that I'm using, that's my favorite beacon blue right there. That is a great American color. It's just it's one of my, I think it's probably my very, very favorite color for skies, especially where I live, because here in Texas we have beautiful blue clear skies. And you can see that I'm working that blue back down, that darker value kind of overlapping those almost striped areas. So it's not quite so defined that, okay, this artist just used a light blue and then a little bit darker blue and then another darker blue. I don't want it to look striped. And so you see that I'm working back down, almost using the pastel itself as a blending tool to help me just create just a really pretty sky. I don't want to blend this. I love those, definite pastel feel and those marks, and letting that pink underpainting kind of vibrate through those blues really helps. Now, one thing that I notice is right there that I'm pointing out is that I have kind of a halo around some of those trees. And so I'm going to get my beacon blue and pull it back down. And this is a really, really soft touch, blending a little bit of those, treetops up into the sky to help create some soft edges. Also just glazing it across. Now I'm going to be creating sky holes over there, and I'm just really wanting to put some sky peeking through. And then I'm going to, right here, I'm scumbling or just swiping a little bit of it off while it still retains a little bit of that color. And then I can go back in right here with some greens and go over those areas. That wasn't a mistake. I wasn't trying to remove the pastel with that little washcloth that I was using. It was just a dry washcloth. I was, utilizing it as a tool to soften some edges, to indicate, yes, there is sky behind these trees, but I don't necessarily want those sky holes to be very harsh or hard edged. Okay, so I feel pretty good about, I kind of wanted to get my sky in pretty quickly here, just because it helps kind of set off the painting. And I know that what I'm going to be working on for the majority of the piece is that field, that little spit of land right there where I am, where there is a lot of warmth, and of course the pathway. I'm bringing in, of course, a very warm color, yellow, although it's a muted, darker yellow, and just scumbling that in with those greens that I had already put down. I'm also going to be bringing in some cooler greens, really thinking about the color temperatures of the specific colors I'm using. Whenever I want there to be a lot of variation in the greens, of course, having that blue underpainting really helps. Having an orange underpainting really helps. And using different color temperatures of greens. I can't stress it enough. We don't want our hills and our valleys and our meadows to be all one solid green, especially in depicting an area like this where I know there is plant life that is vastly different in this area. This is a reference that's taken from Palo Duro Canyon. Of course, if I was to look at the reference image, this painting would turn out much different because there are rocks and really distinct areas that are very Southwest feeling. Now this painting and the reference paint, the mini didn't have as many of those details, and since I'm not looking at the reference photo, I'm able to kind of make it what I want to make it, which is just this really pretty little road on this nice little sloped land with this distant tree line. Worked a little bit putting in some really nice peach in the pathway, and then there's also that really fun little area of grasses that are in the middle of the road. I'm working in some pinks and some of that peach color simultaneously, and it's really hard to see because they're the same value. But I'm wanting to kind of complement the colors that are in the sky underpainting with some pinks in the pathway, and I'll also be adding some pinks in a little bit to the grasses that will also help support those colors. I like to add colors throughout a painting that complement one another and that kind of almost reiterate colors that I've already put down, and that just helps the painting have a little bit of balance. And that it just makes sense with each other. Everything gets along really well whenever you're utilizing those things. Adding a little bit of some more yellows here. starting to work a little bit smaller and a little bit slower. You know, at the beginning, it's just working quickly to get those massed shapes in, working larger shape into smaller shape, stepping back a lot. You know, my pastels are not in front of me. I don't paint with my pastels at all in front of me. They're actually behind me and to my right. And so every time I have to make a color shift, I have to walk about, I would say 4 to 5 feet away from the easel. I have to turn around to pick them out. And then whenever I turn back around, I'm automatically already far away from my easel, and I can really, it helps me just see color. It helps separate myself from my painting a little bit. To what small adjustments may need to be done within the piece. Adding in, this is where the color temperature, is changing, and also just slight hue differences. This is a very, very warm, really light green. Just added a hint of it into the distant trees, and also the same color onto the, into that little sloped land. And sometimes when you're adding a bunch of light, you can lose some of those deep shadows. And so I'm going right back in with that dark blue just to make sure I don't lose the deep shadow of those little juniper bushes, juniper trees that are over there on the right. And yes, I've been asked before about the tree types where I live. We don't have a lot of very tall, very majestic, deciduous trees. We have a lot of pine trees, we have a lot of juniper trees, and whenever they grow, they're very, very bushy. And so yes, they do look like big bushes. They can be large, but they don't necessarily have the majestic structure of some of the trees that are in different parts of the country. The tree on the left is more of a cottonwood type tree, so it does have a stronger trunk structure to it, and you can see that within, just the dark blue marks that I have in the painting and the sky holes that I've been specifically working on. The junipers don't usually have sky holes in them. They're very thick trees, very bushy evergreens, and so they don't have quite as much of that type of sky hole orientation as would the tree on the left. And here you can see that I'm starting to add just some detail of light into the trees to help them have a little bit more form. Since I want the light to be coming from the top right, then just think about it like if there's light grazing across, well, any branches that are coming out towards us, if we're on that little road, any branches that are coming out towards us possibly are being hit by that light. And this helps us create more of a 3D effect in our trees versus just having them all one value of green. Just playing right here with my little pathway. I love to paint paths. It's one of my very favorite things to paint. If you've been around here for a long time, you probably know that by now. If a painting doesn't have a path, I might just add one. I just think it's a wonderful way to invite the viewer into your piece. And let's just take a walk together down this really nice country road. Maybe stop under the shade and have some iced tea or just a drink of water. Listen to the birds sing. You can see that I'm making little flicking motions. And I like to use, I haven't really used very many super soft pastel brands because I like to glaze and really mingle that color together. Sometimes whenever you use only soft pastels, like very soft pastels, which, for those of you that aren't as familiar with this medium, yes, we're using the soft pastel medium, but there are hardnesses within the soft pastel brands. Some are harder that more pencil-like almost than others that are much more powdery and buttery. And so using a different range of hard to very soft pastels can help you, within creating your piece. I really like the harder ones. That right there that I'm using is a new pastel. It's a kind of a mauve colored new pastel. And this is when I said earlier that I was going to be adding some pinks into the land. That's because I felt like the painting needed a little, just a little extra special touch, especially since there's so much pink in the sky. And I, just adding in just some very, very just gentle, scumbled, almost linear marks with that new pastel in the grasses really helps with that. This is a Richardson that I'm using right now. Just a really nice true green. It's a darker value. Just adds a little bit of just nuance to those distant trees and the big main tree over there on the left. Okay, now I'm gonna pop back up there into the sky and maybe work on a little bit of that. You can see whenever I put in a sky hole, I like to soften or just almost tap the edge. I'm not really blending, I'm just tapping and just pulling it across, almost as you could even call it smearing. I'm smearing the pastel across. Don't want to add too many sky holes, and sometimes when I do, like that one for instance, I may cover it up again with the feeling, okay, yes, there's a sky hole there, but I'm going to soften it maybe with some other leaves. So see, I went right back in over it just to soften it. So it is implying that there is some airiness around those, that trunk, but it maybe isn't as a harsh of a line as some of the other parts of the tree and the sky holes in there, in those areas. And sky holes are just one of those things you just have to practice a lot. I love to kind of carve out the trunks from my underpainting, and so if I have a solid underpainting, I can just make two little marks on either side of one another, and that automatically, creates the feeling of the trunk. And they are just kind of it's almost a one step forward, two steps back process to create realistic sky holes. You don't want to make anything that looks like it is hanging on the tree like a Christmas ornament. You really want, to step back a lot. That's what I'm doing. I'm stepping back, relaxing my focus. Some people like to squint down. I just relax my focus almost as if I've taken off some of my glasses, and that way I can really see, are they popping out too much? Am I noticing the sky holes more than anything else in the painting? If I am, then it might be a little too bright or a little too hard edged. Still just tapping on the surface, stepping back, looking. You can see I'm making much smaller, more distinct marks. I'm almost pushing and then wiggling that pastel. That is a Richardson that I'm using right there. Also thinking about if there's light shining on the pathway, anything next to that area of the pathway that's very orange would also be very well lit. And so adding warmer greens to those areas, warmer and brighter greens to those areas can help with that effect. You can also think about sky holes in that, okay, if there's a distant stand of trees off there, maybe you can actually see those behind the main left tree as well, and behind those trees over there on the right. It's not just about sky holes, it can be about, land holes, and just seeing distance, creating the feeling of this landscape going on and on behind your tree. So it's, they're in the same things apply. Right there, I'm just softening with that little washcloth I have. It's just dry, kind of blending in the edges. I don't like to work on my edges a lot. I like to work from, kind of the center and then outwards. And so just blending those helps me see the piece a little bit more. I think I'm listening to some music in my little earbuds that's making me groove while I'm painting. I'm curious what you guys listen to when you paint. I like to listen to all kinds of music. I think I was listening to a Be Happy playlist on my Spotify. Helps me just get in the zone. Changing my values slightly in the trees, just still kind of experimenting with those sky holes. Whenever my head cocks over to the side, that's when I'm going, do I like this? Getting a little bit closer to my finish here. I go much slower and I'm a little bit more focused on specific areas whenever I get towards the ending of a piece. That's a very, very light purple that I'm putting on the edges. Sometimes I love to put light purples at the edges of where a tree meets the sky, the blue sky, just as a really nice transitional color. And of course my black tape. For those of you that often ask about this black tape, it is in the drafting section of my big box craft store. So if you don't have access to black tape, this is just near the drafting section of my art store, and it is a little bit pricey, but it is just so valuable to me that I love to use it. It just really helps me see the piece more as a finish and what may need to happen to finish the piece. I put in a little bit of purple into the low horizon line. Felt like it needed just some warmth down there instead of just being so cool and blue. And I had covered a lot of the pink in that underpainting when I first put that very lightest blue in. And so I think that helps just warm up the sky and helps it just talk to the foreground a little bit more. And then that same, it's actually orchid pink is that color that I'm using. And I'm just also using very, very light, almost linear, just rubbing the pastel up and down in an up and down fashion along its entire full side to help me indicate some grasses growing up in the pathway and on the in that little area, the sloped land. Just really trying to finalize this piece a little bit. Of course, I'm adding much more detail to this larger painting than I have in my reference painting, and a lot of that is because I really want to just reiterate that sense of light streaming across the painting. So adding in some greens here, but there's a problem, and I'm going to point it out to you. My tree and my distant tree are the same value, and so they're blending together. And so I want to separate them again. And so I'm going to take some of my surgical spirits or rubbing alcohol on another fan brush. And I have barely any liquid on my brush at all. It's just enough for me to kind of push that back down into the paper, create a little bit of darkness, although this is going to dry lighter, but it will it removes a little bit. It creates some fun little effects. I'm pushing it into the grasses you can see there at the bottom left to create more of just a feeling of some shadows. You can also, you'll see me do it in a second, I have just the very tips of this little fan brush slightly wet with the rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to be tapping over the sky to create some little branches. And since I have, there's dark green pastel on my fan brush, because basically I'm creating paint. And so when you're tapping over areas that are lighter in value, those will remain. It might dry a little bit darker, but right there what I'm doing is you can see I'm going to zoom in, and you can see that I'm just creating the sense of some branches coming out. And those colors will remain even when the pastel is dry. Make sure you don't have a lot of alcohol at this part. This is not the point where I would ever want anything to drip down. This is just a technique to kind of get back some, have a little bit of linear movement within grass areas and trees. You can see that it dried over there on the left, and so those little trunks aren't quite as prominent as they are whenever they are wet. And then I'm readjusting some of my darks in the shadows. Since I was really working a lot on greens and using quite a few mid-tone greens, I kind of lost that deep shadow that I wanted. And then I can also follow the lines of my trees. Make sure if you're painting something with a trunk that they all connect with one another. Don't accidentally put a sky hole over a tree trunk. That's a very obvious error sometimes in paintings, where we get carried away and, oh no, I've put a sky hole right where there's a tree trunk growing. So just really be careful on those little important areas. That's a new pastel. You can see how it doesn't really lay down a lot of color. I'm just wanting to kind of just glaze in a little bit more darkness to that front right, almost triangle foreground of the grasses. And you have seen this yellow Grumbacher vintage pastel probably many times if you've been watching any of my videos. It's one of my very favorites for adding little tiny wildflowers. This is one of the only pastels I use the tip of in a more pointed way, almost like a pen. For the most part, I like to use the sides of a pastel, and I'm scumbling, but this one is just, it's such a beautiful, bright, happy yellow, and it makes the perfect little distant flowers in this field, which, I don't have in my little mini painting. So this is something I'm adding just because it brings me joy. I love to add flowers and light to pieces. And right there you can see that I have a very dark, almost neutral, that is a yellow. It looks very green. It's a very greenish yellow, dark value, because if that area that I'm in at the bottom left corner or the bottom right corner is in shadow, then so would the flowers, so would those little flower heads. So that's a much more muted yellow than the yellows that I use for my flowers in the light-filled area. So really varying your values within, your shadow colors and your light colors will help you just be a little bit more realistic about how, what are the elements in the landscape and how are they receiving light, and what does that do to them? Does it make them darker and more muted? Yes. And so you can see that I'm just tapping in tiny little marks to help indicate the shadow and the light areas. I'm also going to add a really nice cool green, very just delicately to help support if there's some little stems showing. These are really, really small shifts and changes. And this is just where I'm just having fun with light, bringing in even a brighter light, very, very warm green, tapping and touching to help create that sense of light. Now, one thing that I have thought about while I've been painting this is I'm unsure if I really like the crop that I have. And so I am going to move that tape in a second, and you'll have to tell me what you like better. I think I like it better as a square, because I think that it makes the bottom right area less defined, and also the trees that are angled down. So you'll have to tell me what you think. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. I had so much fun painting it for you. Thank you so much for continuing to check in wherever you are. Stay safe and stay healthy. You guys are the best. I appreciate it so much, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.